reach me. They're dyost@mgcmail.com. So if you've got questions, pictures, follow-up, feel free to reach out to me that way. I'm here at the Fair Oaks store most of the time, so you can always stop by to visit me, give me a call. But sometimes that I can't get to it right away. So email is always a good option there as well. So I'm talking about pruning trees and shrubs. I just started out showing the professional arborist up in the canopy of this big big tulip magnolia, tulip poplar. I don't want you going off the ground. Everything we're talking about today is stuff that you can reach from the ground. You'll see a couple pictures here where I climbed up a few feet into a tree with the help of a ladder. I'm old enough now, I don't really want to do that anymore. The tree I'm using as an example was taken from a little bit earlier. But with that, we're going to just kind of get started right away on this. I'm with you there. So why do we prune? Most of the time, we're pruning to kind of limit the size of plants. As I say, to me, this really goes back to just not good planning. We have a difficult time estimating the mature size of plants that we want to put in there. Plants, they're growing from the day that seed germinates or the day it's planted until the day it dies. It's constantly growing. So sometimes we have this difficult time of saying, well, how big is the tree going to get, or the shrub? And we're always saying, well, relative, we might use terms like landscape size, which might mean, oh, here's the size over the next 7 or 10 years. But then if you're in the house 20 years later, suddenly things are becoming overgrown. When we talk about mature size, that might be over a time period of 30 plus years. And then the customers are sitting here saying, well, I not want to wait 30 years. I'm going to be in the house for 5 years. Kind of getting off a little tangent here, but when we're pruning plants to reduce their size, it really goes back to where we started in terms of selecting plants. So we can avoid a lot of pruning just by doing our homework, planning ahead and selecting plants, and that have the space to grow. But that doesn't happen all the time. We inherit plants from the previous owner. They grow bigger than what the tags told us. They grow bigger than we expected. There's a lot of different reasons that we might be going in there. I'm also making a distinction between maintaining the size of the plant. It's one thing if you've been away out of the country or whatever, and the plant grew really large and it's now covering the house, and you need to go now reduce the size of it. We'll talk about examples with that. But in the ideal world, we would be doing maintenance pruning. So right now, this time of the year, while the plants are dormant, when there's no growth taking place, before the growing season, the weather's nice. If you want to go out and do some maintenance pruning to maintain the size, do a little bit of light shaping, this is going to be really helpful to you in the long run so we don't get into these overgrown things. Then there's also shaping, which is really just aesthetics, cosmetics of the pruning that we will do. We can also have a big influence on the flowering quality with our pruning practices. And sometimes it's a matter of just plant health, pruning out branches that are diseased or broken or injured in some sort of way. So there's a lot of different reasons why we may want to go out there, often more than one reason to do the pruning. I'm going to refer to really 2 different types of pruning cuts. Most of what I'm doing are thinning cuts. So when I say the word thinning cut, I'm talking about going in and snipping off a branch, going back, removing that entire branch, or just thinning those branches out. If I talk about a heading cut, that might be where I'm cutting at the tip of the branch, which would be specifically to get it to flush out, to make it fuller, to try to direct future growth on there. So there's both these heading and thinning cuts. Most of the time what we're doing is thinning branches out and then just doing a little bit of slight heading back, sometimes in terms of reducing the size or trying to promote more flowering that goes on there, or more dense branching. So these things, the best way, and that's why I'm using pictures today, the best way to explain or describe it is to actually show you examples. So that's what we're doing here today. This as you can see off the corner of the house, there's a Japanese maple. This is a Japanese bloodgood maple. It's here off the corner of the house that you can see. It's probably been in that ground. It's planted 15, 20 years prior to when this picture was taken. And it's a beautiful specimen tree. The color, its shape, everything balances and works well with it. But what I want you to take a look at is it's coming over here on this side where the branching is shading out the front window. There's no lighting getting in the window. There's actually fine branches that are coming all the way over to the front door. So our objective with this, and this is why I say pruning, you always, always, always have a plan in mind before you even make your first cut. So our objective with this tree is, one, is I do want to reduce the size of the canopy. I want to bring it back. That will make the entrance to the home a little more accessible, a little more visible, a little more light coming in there is a big thing, and also slightly reducing the canopy size. So that's where we started, and that's our target goal. It's in there. Also, you'll see on Japanese maples, they tend to do this. There's just this canopy's very thick and dense with a lot of branching, and you'll see we go in there and thin some of this out. So it's winter time. We can see the structure in there. It's a nice day, much like today. Perfect conditions, no sap flowing, no pests active. Perfect situation to go in. Here's a close-up image. This is what I wanted you to see from this angle, because in your before and afters compared, here it is coming all the way over, essentially starting to obstruct the entrance rather than highlight and enhance it. Trees in good health, nice choice. Just time to do a little work. As I said, this actually I did go up in the tree a little bit. You know, the canopy's so thick I couldn't fit the ladder in there, but I've got my assistant there keeping an eye on. And this is easy. I'm just kind of going in there to start working the canopy to bring that down. So this is probably about the maximum that you would want to do yourself. And what I'm doing here, it's a technique that we will refer to as sometimes natural target pruning. If you can look where these cuts are being made, I'm going up into the canopy of the tree and I'm thinning branches out where they naturally occur. If we just go in there, and you'll see sometimes what people refer to as topping a tree, if we just go in there and just randomly cut the canopy out of that tree at a set height, the tree reacts by this prolific sprouting of branches comes out from in there. It also opens the tree up to decay and future problems down the road. So we end up with a tree that doesn't look natural. We introduce decay into the tree, and we've actually structurally weakened it if we go in and do this topping practice. So with this, what I call natural target pruning, you can see there's a lot of small cuts going up here in the canopy. I'm making those cuts where a branch already occurs, and it's going off in that pattern.
David, can you tell us about what size clippers you would use for a tree this size?
So with this tree, what I'm using are really two tools. I'm using, and that's really all you need. I'm going to try to see if I can show these. 1 second here. Okay. So everything that I'm doing on this tree is with one of two tools. Just using a pair of bypass pruners. So these are just, this is Felco, very good brand. This will prune up to a 1-inch diameter branch. Really, I'm probably stopping at about 3/4 inch diameter. So if it's 3/4 inch, maybe an inch diameter, we can just cut it with this hand pruner. Again, Felco is an excellent brand, good quality materials, lasts a long time. If it exceeds that 1-inch diameter, then a pruning saw. Again, this is a folding saw. It's only got a 6-inch blade on there. But one of the things that you'll see on a pruning saw, the teeth are pointed backwards. They really are just about razor sharp, and they're very open. So when you're cutting through green wood, it allows that green wood to go through there. It doesn't get all gunked up and everything. So really, with just these two tools, you can do everything that I'm talking about here. I do also have what's called a pole pruner. It's a pruning saw like this that reaches out on a branch. That can be useful if you need to reach up higher in the canopy, but it's not easy to use because it's leveraged out there, puts a lot of strain on your shoulders. So I'm getting to the point where I don't even like using that, but that's another one that might be available to you. Any other questions before we go back to the pictures here?
I just want to put in a quick note for some. We do have some people putting in like specific questions about their own plants in their yard. So if we have time to get to those, we will. For the time being, I'm going to go with some more general questions. So, we do have one more about the tools. Someone asked, would you ever use a lopper?
Yes, I would use a lopper. Loppers, when I talk a little bit about pruning shrubs, I'll bring that into our conversation. But with the trees that where everything's pretty much above ground, that might be my third tool. If I said, hey, the first tool I'm going to get is a pair of hand pruners, the second one's a pruning saw. Those are two you need to have. Loppers, that's kind of a luxury. It's a good thing to have. It makes it a little bit easier to reach things and you can cut with less strain.
Thanks, David. We've got another question coming in about tools, so let me know if you need to move on. But
no, I don't care whether we get through our pictures or not.
Sounds good. All right.
Yeah.
The next question is about the pros and cons of anvil versus bypass pruners and titanium versus steel. Or is there any difference?
Okay. So this, there is, we talked about it. So this is a bypass pruner, right? It cuts like a pair of scissors. It's literally cutting through there. So on live tissue, living branches, I do prefer a bypass pruner. It's a cleaner cut. What they call an anvil pruner comes down straight like this against a hard edge. So that actually is easier to cut. It takes less hand strength to do that. But the deal is when you're cutting like this, you're actually pinching the plant tissue. And so on tender plants, saying like roses or something like that, when you cut through there, you're actually bruising and causing a little bit of an injury. So I prefer to use that if I'm taking dead wood out of there. If I'm cutting dead branches off of it, then that anvil pruner makes it easier. But if it's live tissue, a bypass is probably better. I haven't even heard of or used titanium pruners. That sounds really interesting to me. It sounds really expensive also. So I'm not going to be much help to you there, but I think the minute you say titanium, I mean this stainless steel ones, like what I'm showing you here, this is aluminum handle, so it's lightweight, stainless steel blade, sharpens well, holds the edge well. And these are expensive. Believe me, these things will cost you a fortune. So titanium, I'm interested, but I'd have to look at the cost on that.
Thanks, David. Those are all the questions on tools for now.
Well, let's go back and look at, let's take a look and see how things go with this tree. So as I said, we're up here. One of the main reasons that I'm trying to make my cuts where it naturally divides is one is that's how trees grow. It's going to look better. But also every time we injure the tree, we open it up to decay. Wood decay organisms get in there. And I'll say right now, putting that wound dressing over top of the cut doesn't do any good at all for the tree. We still have it, we still sell it, it's still available because it sometimes makes you feel better, and that's the way we were trained 20, 30 years ago to treat wounds. We would cut the branch and then we'd come back and paint an ointment over to make us feel like we were fixing that up. But really, trees react very differently than people do, and the science has shown it doesn't really make a difference one way or the other. When you are making a branch cut, there's this little enlarged area here. It's called a branch collar. This is where a tree naturally seals over and closes off those wounds, and it isolates and compartmentalizes decay within that. Over on this side of the picture, this is a little bit of a cross section where you can see a branch was pruned off here, a branch was removed years ago. The tree reacted, it isolated. I get this little small pocket of decay that's right inside this region here. And then this is all healthy new wood that's grown over. So by protecting this branch collar, we allow the tree to do its thing of compartmentalizing decay, keeping it within here, and it will seal over itself with clean, healthy wood. If you injure that, if you go in the old days, we would do what we call a flush cut. We will cut right along adjacent to the tree like that. When you injure the branch collar, you remove the tree's defenses, and it allows the wood decay to continue to spread into the main trunk or the main branch, and the entire, over years, the whole interior of that tree starts to rot out. And you've seen this in the most extreme worst case scenario. The tree hollows out, it topples over because it can't support its own weight anymore. And you've seen this where you've got it's all healthy and green on the outside and completely hollowed out, rotten on the inside. So this is, again, why it's important we make our cuts correctly. And we produced a little video, just a little 3-minute thing that actually shows where I'm out with these tools, removing a branch, showing you where the branch collar is. So if you feel like viewing that, that's on YouTube. This is the address, the link that's there. And I think Sally's also putting that in the comments section for
Yeah,
us.
I'm about to put it into chat, and I'll put it into Facebook comments for anyone streaming on Facebook.
Okay. So we're going to move on. This is the finished product. You can see it's just pulled back a little bit from the doorway, probably, 2 feet at most from there. I wish I could have gone up into the top canopy and removed a little bit of this just in terms of cosmetics and shaping, but that's kind of getting to beyond the limits of what I could reach. But most of these thinning cuts, you can see some of these little cuts that are in here up in the upper canopy. There were just a couple branches that were crossing or rubbing on the interior, or thin those out. But at the end of the day, when this pruning is finished, the tree still looks like a tree in its natural form, its natural shape. In terms of routine maintenance, I don't like to take any more than 20% of the total canopy out at any one time. If we wanted to come back the following year and gradually reduce this, we could take the size back a little bit further. But that's what a pruned tree should look like. And this is here we go leafing out in spring. So again, this one to me came out really nice, and it's about the limits to what I think a homeowner would do. If it's any larger than this, you're probably talking with an arborist. All right. Back to the question on loppers, and this is thinning on a shrub. Here, I've got just the graphics showing before and after. And here the plant has so many branches coming out from the bottom. It has this kind of congested look. The plant's almost competing with itself, shading itself. This might lead to diminished flowering. Maybe again, if it's sprawling out to the sides, getting into the sidewalk, the driveway, we want to reduce the size of it. We can go in and do this selective thinning where we're going down towards ground level and removing entire branches. This is, like I was saying, where loppers are really handy, because plan B is like if you're down here in your hands and knees with a pruning saw cutting it, it's just really nice if you can use a pair of loppers as demonstrated here to reach into it. So that's where I think loppers are a really nice accessory to add to your tool collection. Again, try to give you a real life example. This is the, smoke tree, one they call royal purple. It's got this deep burgundy colored leaf on. And in the late spring, early summer, it gets these gray poofs. It looks literally like poofs of snow, of smoke in the canopy as the blooms go on there. So this is grown for its pretty foliage, for its attractive flowers that are in there. But over the years, it just was neglected. And there's a number of what I'm going to call structural corrections I want to make here. Also bring it down in size. Again, we always want to look at the plants, evaluate them, and have a plan in mind before we start pruning. So as I look at this plant, if you can see this branch coming right through here, it's kind of rubbing and crisscrossing here. It's got this sucker that's working its way through these branches. So these branches are rubbing in these two places. When they're rubbing against each other like this, that creates wounds, that becomes an injury, decay, and other pests get in there. So these are structural problems that I want to correct. And then at some point in time, somebody had gone in and just topped this plant. It hadn't been pruned correctly. This is where I'm talking about, hey, they just came in and they just lopped off sections of it. And then the plant reacted with a lot of suckers sprawling out of there. So as I look at it, it's an old smoke tree. It's got this interesting structure to it. I like these old branches that are coming off in this direction. Kind of playing on that, almost I'm going to use the word kind of a bonsai type of look to it, but I think we can actually enhance this and take advantage of it. So first thing I'm doing is what I call my structural pruning. And this is how I proceed with pruning. When I look at the first thing I'm going to do is if there are branches that are dead or dying or crossing or rubbing, make any kind of these structural corrections first. And you can't really see it, but I am being careful to protect the branch collar on these cuts that are in there. And after I do my structural pruning, I correct those problems with it. Here's a good example of where somebody had gone in and topped this plant. They had just cut this branch off and then boom, 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 all these different branches suckering out from there. So in here, I'm going through and I'm thinning these out. What I'll do is I'm going to pick probably 3 or 4 or 5 of the strongest branches, leave them behind to start again building stronger structure in the plant, thin out the competing growth. And so I'm just trying to look ahead and decide what stays and what goes on here. And then this becomes the final product where I have made what we call heading cuts in here just to sort of start to manage its size. Now, sometimes a plant like this, it may be a 2-3 year process to really get it back in tip-top condition. But again, right now, as you can see, this is done in the wintertime while it's dormant. You can see what you're doing. It's easier because I don't have even the weight of all the leaves to carry around. And face it, everybody, including myself, is like going stir crazy. It's been cold, it's been wet, it's been gray. You know, if you get a nice sunny day, this is something that's fun to do. And plants are forgiving. If you can't mess it up. Anything you do wrong, it can be repaired later. Yes, Sally?
We had a question come in if there's any rule of thumb for targeting older versus newer branches.
Interesting point. Depends a little bit what our objective or what we're trying to do. Actually, now that I think about it, this plant's going to serve as a good example. The one that I'm pruning right here, this smoke tree, the new growth that comes out of it, the new juvenile growth has the deepest, richest coloration in it. So a lot of times people will cut this plant back vigorously because they want the juvenile young shoots for brighter coloration. So I'll show you in some other plants where we might take some of the old growth out because we're trying to rejuvenate it and get fresh new growth that's got brighter coloration or better flowering qualities in it. So we do that a lot to manipulate flowering on some of our shrubs and also leaf color. So I'm going to hit back and I got to show you the finished product in this because I think this answers your question. So this is that same plant. That you can kind of see all this new growth that's come up. All that's got deeper color, more vibrancy. So we are trying to rejuvenate it to get that new growth to come out. But the flower buds are formed off of old growth. So I also wanted to leave behind enough of the old growth to produce these flowers that are in here. So we can manipulate this and we do it all the time. Good, and I'm going to use this even to continue follow up on your question. So limelight hydrangea, this is another quick one I'll go through. This is hydrangea paniculata. It blooms for us in sort of August, September time period. Super vigorous plant. The one we're looking at here is grown on what they call standard. It's been manipulated. It normally is a large multi-stem shrub, but here it's coming up on a single trunk that you'll see later. And it's been developed in kind of this miniature tree form for the backyard. So that's kind of my before after. Again, we start with my structural pruning. There was this one branch that was crossing through the center. I wanted to direct this to a more outward kind of pattern. So we did that. It's showing where that branch is removed. Again, this is a thinning cut. And then this is our finished product where we've gone in and removed and thinned out some of that canopy, but also just brought the size down. Again, this is a vigorous growing plant. I think this gives you an idea of the amount of material that came out of this one panicle hydrangea. So the plant will respond because it's vigorous. It's going to put out a flush of new growth, and that new growth is going to be really productive on the flowering. So this is a real plant by plant question. And it also depends a little bit on what you're trying to achieve. So yes, with our flowering shrubs, we usually are trying to rejuvenate them and get new growth out of it. And we'll cut old, less productive growth. Flip side might be ornamental trees where we want to preserve some of the old growth and we're removing the juvenile. So kind of a long-winded, complicated answer to a simple question. Did we have more questions, Sal?
Oops, sorry, had to hit the unmute button. We have two questions. One is actually about smoke tree. The other one is about beauty bush. So I'll go ahead and ask you the smoke tree question since we just had that pictured. So this person has a smoke tree. At the end of the summer last year, the main trunk divided into 3 branches, which just grew like straight up. So she wants to know how you prune them. And again, if that's something that you already covered, then that's
no, that's let me say that's the way smoke tree grows. Just like I'm showing you crape myrtle in this picture, they are multi-stem trees. So that's their natural growth habit. Now, we as gardeners, we can manipulate the plants. I always say this is a partnership. We want to do what's right for the plant, but we also are trying to do what's right for us, what we want to do. So you could conceivably thin out those competing branches and just try to grow it into a single stem tree. That's not its natural form, but you could do it just the same way this crape myrtle that we're looking at now is naturally a multi-stem tree, but you will see them in the nursery where we have cut the competing branches out and created a single stem tree out of it. So it's your choice. I like plants that look like plants, is what I'm always saying. So I prefer to preserve its natural shape, and I would treat it like we did in the earlier example, or much like we did with this, as I'll show you quickly, the crape myrtle. Now, the other you said was beautyberry?
Yes. Yeah, and we've had questions come in about red twig dogwood as well. So I don't know if you want to wait on the specific plants, or if you have a couple minutes to
yeah, well, let me questions. So I'm trying not to make this like a lecture. And like I said, I don't care how far we get into it because I really do want to be more conversational and talk about your plants. So let me say we had red twig dogwood, another great example of what we were talking about. Red twig dogwood, one of the primary characteristics that we grow for it is the young juvenile growth is that really bright iridescent red that's great in flower arrangements that looks so nice in our landscape in the wintertime. But the first and second year growth is very bright. When it starts to get about 3 years old, bark starts forming, the coloration starts to become dull. This is just a natural maturation process that the plant goes through. So if we let red twig dogwood just grow, we end up with a large multi-stem shrub with a little bit of bright red branches at the tips. And that's fine. Great wildlife plant, and that's the way it grows, and it's beautiful in its own right. If I'm growing that because I want the stems and I'm much more interested in it for floral arrangements and that kind of thing, if that's my primary goal, I've seen where every year at this time of year, late winter, early spring, and I'm really saying between now and April, when I keep saying this time of year, you don't have to go do it today, but sometime between now and the beginning of April, people go in and cut that back hard. They'll cut it really down to like 12 inches tall. And then what you're doing is you're manipulating the plant. It sends this proliferation of twigs up. Because they're young and they're juvenile, they're going to be your brightest red twigs. In the process of doing that, I've also just cut all my flowers off. So I'm saying in that case, one extreme is, hey, I don't care about the flowers. I'm going to sacrifice those. I want really bright red twigs for floral arrangements. And people that grow these plants for commercial scale will go in there and cut them back hard right now to produce a lot of juvenile shoots for the red stems. Beautyberry, again, multi-stem shrub. I would do what I call the selective thinning, where I get that pair of loppers and go in, thin out some of the old branches, because again, the older branches sometimes become less productive in their flowering and the berry production. but then leave, take maybe 25%, maybe of the old branches out, leave the rest of the plant behind to flower and produce berries. So each one of these, like I said, is going to be just a little bit different. Yeah, I'm going to cover crepe myrtle because that's a good example. This is a multi-stem crepe myrtle. Again, it's just been thinned out. You can see where somebody has come in. This wasn't my work, but I thought it was a nice example. They thinned out some of the competing branches to highlight the structure and eliminate what I call it kind of congested look in there. And this is how it blooms in the summer. In a very naturalized form, good structural pruning, attractive plant. To me, job well done. The renewal pruning, like I said, we can do this on the red twig dogwood, where you go in and you just chop it down and boom, 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 you get this proliferation of shoots that comes up, and they're going to be bright, vibrant red. People will do this with crepe myrtle sometimes. And here you can see these crepe myrtles, if you can look right across this height, maybe this is about 20 inches off the ground. At one point in time, somebody just came by here with a saw and just cut them right back like that. Boom, 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 right across the top. We're manipulating the shape and form of the plant, so it's not going to have that same naturalized look that I want. But again, this is a commercial entrance. You can see how the plant responds, a proliferation of branching. And because this young juvenile foliage, it's going to be strong and productive in its flowering. So we are manipulating the plant into kind of an unnatural shape and form for our own purposes of design and creating the flowers. So you guys, you play with this and you decide how to do it. This is something I thought was kind of interesting. Here they were integrating both methods. You can see we went in and they did this kind of thinning type cuts in there, but they also went in and did quite a bit of cuts up there in the top canopy of it. And again, here is the after picture. Again, commercial site where this kind of pruning was effective and looks nice. So I don't go out there. A lot of people say, oh, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, you can do this, you can't do that. That's not my approach to things. You can prune. It's really, in many ways, it's up to you. I just kind of depends on the effect that you're after. I want you to understand what the repercussions are, and then make your own choices, experiment, and have fun with it. Everything that I was talking about so far is what we refer to as blooms off of new growth. So the crepe myrtle, the panicle hydrangea, if we cut them back now in the wintertime, boom, they regrow and they bloom this summer. You do need to understand the flowering qualities of the plant we're talking about. This little schematic, is a viburnum. So if you were growing viburnum and you went out and looked at viburnum in your garden right now today, you would see these large buds at the terminal ends, at the tips. You would see this on dogwoods. You'd see this on azaleas. If you go out and prune them today, you just need to be aware that you are removing the flower buds. So if your priority is flowering, let's say it's a lilac, and you just love, live for the bloom of that lilac, then that might be an example of a tree, a plant, they say, I'm going to let it flower in April. I'm going to enjoy all the flowers. And then after the flowering goes done, I'll go in and I'll do the pruning in May. So these are the kind of choices that you'll need to make based on what the plant is and what your objectives are. My preference is I'd go in, if I had a viburnum or I had a lilac, with some of these early spring bloomers, I would prune it now, but I would be doing this, what I call this thinning cuts, because if I'm thinning, I'm, let's say, removing 20% of the branches, but I'm leaving 80% of them behind, so I still get good flowering on there. So I'm going to take advantage of the time of year to do my pruning, but I'm going to be sure that I leave flower buds on there. And again, I'm going to hit this real quick, and then we'll take some questions. This becomes really, really significant if we start talking about shearing plants. Because here, again, you're going in, you're shearing the plants, you're trimming all the tips off of it to create some kind of a weird geometric shape. In the process of doing this, you run the risk of removing the flower buds. So when you go to a viburnum and you go and you shear it, you just took the flower buds off and you've only left maybe 10 or 12 behind that escaped the shears to bloom for you. The one at the top, this is the natural form for the same plant. These are the same plant. The only difference is in how it was pruned. Me, like I said, I'm always going to prefer more naturalized shape. That's why you're going to see me hand pruning with selective thinning and selectively cutting tips back. You're not going to find this kind of look in my garden, but again, I'm not here to judge you. Any questions before we move into, I think evergreens is coming up next.
Yeah, we actually have some questions coming up about boxwood and camellia. I'm not sure if the camellia is the same as boxwood, actually, but we have one going back about beautyberry. Can you do renewal pruning on a beautyberry bush where you just?
Yes, you absolutely can. The part that I'm not positive on is it may mean that you may lose berries for this year. That's the part I can't remember. If it's going to grow back and flower and produce fruit in its first year, or if you'll have to do that, wait a second year for it. The plant will recover, that I know. But it may cost you just one season of berries if you do total renewal pruning.
Thanks, David. We just had, so like I said, I think you're covering evergreen. So we have boxwood and camellia is the next question.
Yeah, well, let's hit that real quick because we are going to run out of time. We're talking about evergreens, broadleaf evergreens, things like boxwoods, hollies, camellias. The broadleaf evergreens, an entirely different scenario than needled evergreens. So pines, spruce, junipers, they are not included in this discussion. If we have time, I'll get to those, but I really want to talk about the broadleaf evergreens. So boxwood, since we had a question on there, is a popular plant. This is a boxwood hedge down at Montpelier, Madison's estate. And here, very formal setting, creating this kind of hedgerow along the walkways and back there. And what they've been doing, again, this is not being critical in any way. This was a style of gardening. They've been trimmed and sheared into this kind of geometric form. And over time, what will happen if you just kind of keep them in this condition, you'll develop what I call this outer crust of foliage on the inside, and then they go totally bare on the interior. So preferably the way we like to prune boxwood, and I'm not judging, because believe me, if I had a hedge like that one at Montpelier to go out there and do thinning on, I mean, that you'd have to have a crew. Otherwise, it's going to take you a month if you're by yourself. But this would be an example here where I'm about a thinning. And this is the way I prefer to manage boxwoods, where we go in and selectively we're pulling some branches, thinning it out there so that we open the canopy up. That allows more sun to get in there, better air circulation, so the plant can produce more growth on the interior. More growth, more leaves means more photosynthesis, better health and vigor. This is a little boxwood hedge at my house where I combine both. This is insularis boxwood or Korean boxwood. It's a little more vigorous than the English. So what I did here, all these little holes, all these gaps, all these openings that you see in there, I intentionally created those. That's where I'm going in with my hand pruners, thinning them out. Then, and I realized this isn't for everybody, then after thinning them, I did go back and shear them because I wanted a more formal look in this situation. Generally, people don't treat boxwoods this way, but again, this is part of my learning and stuff, saying, hey, it just comes down to knowing the plants and the effect and what you're trying to create. So this was done very late March, early April. You can see some of the daffodils coming up. Then as spring approached, I took my little phone camera and I stuck it down inside that boxwood to show you. This is all new growth that's coming up on the interior of the boxwoods. And then this is that boxwood hedge about a month later after it's flushed out some new growth on there. So with our broadleafed evergreens, how you prune them depends a lot on how vigorous the plant is. If I had English boxwood, which is very compact, very slow growing, that I'm going to have to treat much more gently in terms of pruning it. if I have one of these new hybrids that's really vigorous and puts on a lot of growth, those I can shear them, and you can always combine these things. Camellias are essentially treated the same way, but with camellias, we're much more concerned about the flowers on there. So camellias, if you've got Camellia japonica, it may already be blooming or it's really close to flowering. So with that, I'm going to wait until after it's flowered and prune that. Camellia sasanqua, which is a fall bloomer, they set their flower buds again in August. So the time to prune them is going to be a little bit later, kind of more like April, May time period. So let me say, camellias, rhododendrons, azaleas, some of the ones that we prune later in the year after flowering, I did not include in this presentation because I knew we'd run out of time. I'm going to make an opportunity for us to talk about those later, but you're going to be doing your pruning on that, let's say more towards May time period. Real quick, hollies, because again, fall in this broadleaf evergreen group. These were big overgrown plants. I don't have my before picture in there, but they were 6-8 feet tall down American University. It's overgrown. They got cut down to about a 8-10 inch height, and you can see they're already starting to fill back in. This is about 1 year later, and you see they're coming back in. So on some of our broadleaf evergreens are really vigorous, like this case was a Burford holly. We can do this heavy renewal pruning. Azaleas will respond to this. So it depends a little bit plant by plant. Again, these are the broadleaf evergreens. Before I go into conifers, because I think we may not even get into the conifers, let's see if we have any questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions that have come in on boxwoods. The first question is, we have very large boxwoods that I want to shorten 50%. Is that something you can do?
That's something that you would probably want to do over a period of 2 or 3 years, not all at once. Again, this depends a little bit on the condition and the type of boxwood that you have, but I'm assuming they're some of the older varieties, probably an English boxwood, but even the American boxwood, that I might take, again, like maybe take a third of the canopy down this year, let it regrow some. Next year, you can drop it another third, let it regrow a year after that. Boxwoods, because they're slow growers, they're not real vigorous. If you do a real hard pruning like you're talking about, you may be left with some bald spots that just don't fill back in. So those boxwoods are a little temperamental.
So you wouldn't recommend a renewal pruning on these either? Is that correct?
No, I would not. I would not do that with boxwoods.
Okay.
All again, right. It depends a little bit on which one. I'm simplifying, yeah. But generally, no.
Okay. Next question about boxwoods is, do you prune boxwoods that turn yellow or orange during the winter?
It doesn't matter. That's just some boxwoods have this winter discoloration. It's more pronounced than others, depending on the variety it is. So that's not really a good indication of the plant's health. They're going to green up again, whether you prune them or not. So I just follow the standard pruning of saying, hey, you can do definitely good idea to go in there and thin them. And if you want to do some light shearing to shape them up, that's okay too.
That makes sense. Okay, last question about boxwoods. Which part of the boxwood branch should be cut when thinning? Do you cut all the way to the main stem, or do you just cut a few inches down?
Again, I hate this answer, it depends, but I'll go all the way down into the main stem. It goes back to how much I'm trying to reduce the size of the plant. Again, with boxwood, if you cut into a really old stem on boxwood, you'll know how hard and how dense that wood is. And this is just my opinion from pruning plants for 30 years like that and working in boxwoods. If I have a slow growing plant that's not real vigorous, I mean, again, this is just the way boxwoods are. It doesn't mean it's sickly. They take time to grow and they develop this really hard, dense, solid wood. And if I cut into that wood, just like rhododendrons will do the same thing, sometimes they just don't have the vigor to regenerate and fill back in. So that's why I'm always cautious on some of these slow growing, less vigorous species of plants. So I'll usually stay in younger, softer, more juvenile growth if I can. But if the situation calls for it, I might go in and cut some of the old branches right down to the main stem. But I'm going to do that on a limited basis.
Okay, thanks, David. That was the last question on boxwood. So I know we're running short on time. So I don't know if you have anything else. I'm sorry, David.
We're going to need a whole program on boxwood. That's what
Yeah,
I'm learning here today.
We probably will. So we do have a few more questions. I know we usually stop at 2:45. So what I'm probably going to tell everybody is if you guys have questions on really specific trees, I mean, by really specific, I just mean whatever trees are in your yard. We tried to hit some of the highlights today, but we know we're never going to be able to cover everything. Please feel free to email us or contact David. Contact our plant clinic. You can email me. I'll refer you to someone else because I don't know anything about pruning. I will not be answering your questions, but David can. And we would be happy to help you guys. And David, I know, is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we close for the day? Or I know this is a huge topic.
Just one little thing I'll say, I'm not going to bother showing you the pictures. What I was going to say with conifers, with needled evergreens, they produce their growth only from the green tips. So that's what I was going to say. If you cut back into the old growth, they are not recovering. They're not filling back in. You have to leave green tips behind, which is why I just say that's a whole different category, treated differently. So the stuff that I was talking about today, you can go out, put it to work on your deciduous trees and shrubs, allow your broadleaf evergreens, trees and shrubs. Just if you have any questions, like Sal said, check with us first. Just I don't want you to go out there and accidentally trim. Worst case scenario is you trim all the flowers off, but we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we're definitely happy to take questions here. I know this is a huge topic, and like David said, I'm sure we'll be coming back with another pruning class on definitely on azaleas and rhododendron, I'm sure. So thank you so much, everybody. This concludes our plant clinic for today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about spring lawn care. And if you have any recommendations or topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to send me an email at sburrows@mgcmail.com or go to our website and fill out the contact us form. That's another way you can do it if you're on Facebook. So thank you so much, David. We appreciate you joining us today.
Okay, everybody have a good day.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.